Chapter 1. The Glass Mirror. Fragments of powdery snow swept across Zabina's face. She watched the hobgoblin with its scrawny limbs and hairy body lean over the precious glass pieces. They looked much like ice to her, just as translucent and delicate. She held a piece up, a tiny square, wet with winter's dew. She tried to see herself, but all she could see were her curled fingers on the other side. "How does it work?" Zabina asked the hairy beast, lowering the ice to the floor of her castle.
"Some use mercury, others a precious rock, but I find magic much quicker."
He grinned her way, his pointy teeth dripping with goopy saliva. She sat on her throne, smoothing the wrinkles on her long silver dress. White hair fell down and framed her pale cheeks, bringing out the darkness of her richly blue eyes that looked almost black in certain lighting. Dark magic is forbidden in these parts. She said it merely as a fact, not a warning. She had long ago given up on following the rules. The dark did not scare her, or, if it did, she refused to admit it.
"What do you wish to use the mirror for?"
the hobgoblin asked. She sucked back an icy cold breath that dragged down her throat and made her wince. "I have heard many an evil queen has one, not only to admire herself, but also to be like an all-seeing god." There was more to it, though, more than just seeing all. She did not, in fact, want to see all, just one. Someone she had left behind. Her heart shifted uncomfortably behind her chest at the thought of him. Strands of gray light flickered from the hobgoblin's fingers as he chanted the spell over the glass. The pieces began to line up perfectly. The hobgoblin held it up for her to see as it continued to sew the broken pieces together. All was going as planned. The Snow Queen could even see her reflection now, her middle-aged face that still looked young, her narrow nose with a single freckle on the side. She stood and came closer, allowing her fingers to touch the delicate surface that burned. But then the blinding light of the sun shone through a small crevice of the window. It reflected its great light upon the magical mirror, straight into Zabina's dark eyes. She stumbled backwards, then forward. Her hands, once so careful, now clumsily struck the glass as she fell onto it, nearly flattening the hobgoblin on the other side. The glass beneath the weight of her body slowly cracked open. Small shards, mixed with the gray magic strands, emerged like puffs of smoke. They tangled themselves into the wind and blew right out the window. Aksel looked through the window. He and his sister Cathrine held up pennies warmed by the stovetop against the clear pane so that the heat could melt away the fog and give them a sharper picture of the bustling little town. Lampposts glittered, dimmed, then brightened, as a line of mist swept over them. It was a gray morning in the small town of Oplist. Its houses, all square and so close to each other they were touching, sat quietly. The yellow glow of candlesticks on top of the pine trees flickered through windows encased in ice. A family wrapped in fur coats with scarves touching their lips walked down the sidewalk before stopping at a house across the street. A little boy knocked on the door. It opened to let them in. Aksel squinted, trying to see what decorations they had set out for Christmas. But the family's fur coats blocked his view, and then the door closed.
"The Yulenisa will pull your ear if you do not set the table for lunch, Aksel,"
Motmor said jokingly, fingers white with flour rubbing at her apron. The Yulenisa were red-dressed little gnomes with long white beards and silly triangle hats of knitted cloth that often fell in their faces. They did not exactly scare Aksel, or anyone for that matter. They looked far too harmless. Still, he did as told. Unlike the Yulenisa, Motmor Bente was intimidating. Aksel swept back his white blonde hair before taking the plates with their decorative blue designs to the table. In the middle, Motmor Bente had already laid out the bread and cold meats.
"We've invited both the Holmes and the Becks to join us,"
Bente said. Aksel proceeded to count the chairs. His Motmor had already added extra, but it would be a tight fit.
"We don't have a long enough table for both families, though," We will all just have to squeeze in then. It'll be fine. You're quite skinny after all.
She pinched his bicep and laughed. He merely shrugged. He didn't mind squeezing in, though he wasn't too sure how his Moor would feel about it. She was always fretting about not having enough food or enough space. What is this about not a long enough table? Laura appeared from behind the doorframe. Her dirty blonde hair was pulled up into a sleek bun, and her face painted with makeup, something she only ever did when company was coming.
Momo said she's invited both the Holmes and the Becks,
Aksel said. Both of them? Laura's blue eyes widened.
We have enough room,
Momo assured her. She walked over and placed her wrinkled hands on her daughter's shoulders and proceeded to massage them.
All will be fine, I promise. We've had a full house before.
Why both families?
Why not? Tina is Cathrine's best friend, and Miguel is Aksel's.
I'm not sure how I feel about the Becks, though. They are so nosy. She quickly glanced around the humble cottage, looking for anything that might be misplaced. There's dust on the windowsill, she sighed, grabbing a damp cloth to wipe it with. And whose cup is just sitting here on the coffee table? Montmore watched her, a smile on her face.
You worry too much, my dear. Nobody will notice a small pinch of dust or a cup that's been forgotten. They will be far too busy eating.
The Becks would notice and talk about it for a week.
You're being ridiculous. Nobody would bother gossiping about such minuscule things. And if they did, who'd listen? I'd fall asleep to gossip like that.
Cathrine brushed against Aksel as she headed to the table to better align the napkins, confident her mole would notice those next.
Moore's gonna be uptight till Christmas Day,
Aksel whispered to his sister.
Better close your bedroom door.
She winked at him. They both laughed, faces close to each other's and bodies bent over the table. There was a knock at the door, then several more. Montmore untied her apron, hung it on a hook on the wall, and headed over.
Happy you laughed in,
she said as she creaked the door open.
Let me take your coats.
Laura looked up, broom in hand, as she had found some stray crumbs. Happy you laughed then, she chimed in. Please make yourselves at home. She leant the broom against the wall, suddenly realizing her husband was nowhere in sight. I'll be right back, she said, scurrying off to the bedroom. Conrad, company is here. Tina came hopping over. She smiled at the figurines on the windowsill behind the table. Oh, these are pretty, she said, picking one up.
They're the wise men,
Cathrine explained.
Aksel sculpted them and I painted them.
Wow, you did it yourselves? We bought our nativity set at the market.
It was my Fa's idea, Cathrine said. He said we could do just as good of a job.
Miguel brushed past Tina and took a seat beside Aksel. He looked at him sideways, his tall frame casting a shadow over him as the sun cast its rays his way.
You look utterly bored,
Miguel whispered.
I'm just here for the food, Aksel whispered back. Then I'm off to the fort.
Miguel grinned. He knew what that meant. Just then, Aksel's Fa emerged from the bedroom and hobbled to the table where everyone was sitting. He smiled at the company, all squished close together like a pack of sardines. Then he sat down and rubbed his knee that the cold always bothered. Aksel shifted uncomfortably in his chair at the sight, guilt rising from the pit of his stomach and yanking on his chest. He wished he could escape to the fort this very instant, run away from the reminder, but he also knew it wouldn't work. He had already tried it. The reminder stayed whether his Fa was present or miles away. The icy rope tied to the fort had stung Miguel's cold fingers. He sat on the edge of the wooden landing, observing the red marks on his skin before stuffing them into his coat pockets.
I think you should make a ladder. The rope is fraying and is really hard to climb when ice forms on the outer layer.
Aksel looked over at his friend, then back to the colorful sky before them.
I don't have a problem with it, and I climb it every day. You don't have a problem with anything cold.
Miguel shook his head, allowing his brown hair to whip back and forth under his hood.
It's like you're immune to it.
Aksel shrugged, looking down at the coat he had worn at his Moor's demand, but had left unbuttoned.
I think you're just a wimp.
He gave a sly smile. Miguel nudged him.
Or you're just not human. Who knows? Maybe you're some descendant of a god.
They both laughed. Aksel placed his arm around his friend's shoulder and pulled his cold body close to his warm skin.
There's only one God, Miguel, and we're both his sons. If I didn't know the truth, though,
Miguel trailed off. He knew talking of it made Aksel uncomfortable, though he didn't know why. He thought it was cool. He wished he didn't need a coat himself. The fewer layers, the faster you can move, the freer you feel. It certainly wasn't a bad type of different. Aksel pulled on a little string looped around a hole in the wood. Under it was another piece of wood and frozen pastries.
I grabbed them from my Momo's stash a couple breakfasts ago,
he said, passing one to Miguel.
We just ate.
Aksel tore a bite off his pastry, watching the flakes fall to his lap.
You don't need to eat yours then. I don't know how you can be so skinny,
Miguel said, placing his on a branch beside him. He didn't feel he could stomach a single bite after such a lunch.
I guess I'm used to my Momo's cooking. You're so lucky. She's probably the best cook in the village, and after she's gone, it'll probably be your mo or sister, but only because they'll have her recipes.
The implication that someone could ever take his Momo's place made Aksel's heart ricochet against his chest. He swallowed a lump forming in his throat, struggling to get the rest of the pastry down. She had been acting strange lately, and he knew Miguel's Momo had died the age his Momo was now. Death was a scary thought to him. Even though he believed in heaven and God, he was still scared. A lot of things scared him, though he rarely admitted it.
Hey, what's that?
Miguel pointed toward gray strands like cloudy string floating over the forest and toward their village.
Is a storm coming?
Aksel squinted at the sight. They did look a bit like clouds, but not quite. Something within them glittered, and unlike storm clouds, they were spread far apart and were stretched thinly across the sky. Aksel jumped to his feet.
We should head back just in case. The fort's got too many holes to shelter us from rain. Yeah, I wasn't about to take my chances.
Cathrine and Tina sat by the window, Cathrine with her embroidery in hand and Tina with a book.
What's your latest project now?
Tina asked, looking up from the pages. She was not properly reading, just skimming and looking at pictures whenever silence would fall over the two.
It's Anissa.
Cathrine held up the partially done-up elf with his little pointed hat. His pointy red hat was perfectly done, but his face was still a blank canvas.
My femme is convinced they're real,
Tina said, laughing. She says they steal all her cookies, but I think that's my fa. They both giggled. Silence fell. Tina looked at her book. It was a story about the Snow Queen, her favorite fairy tale because it was the one her femme insisted was real. Not detail for detail, but in general. She insisted, even to this day, with Tina no longer a little child, that the Snow Queen existed and even used to live in Oplist. More than that she hailed from the Anderson family. It was why Tina had gone out of her way to befriend Cathrine. She didn't regret doing that, of course, but realized pretty quickly that her femme's tales were clearly all made up. Cathrine and her family were entirely ordinary.
The Snow Queen again.
Cathrine eyed the spine of the book. Tina shrugged. You know me. I'm sure you have it memorized by now. Almost. She closed the book over her hand and looked over at her friend. You know, my femme told me she's real. Cathrine gave a sly smile, her fingers dipping up and down as she worked on the elf's dark eyes. Of course she did. She remembered all the imaginary things her Momo likewise used to tell her were real. She said she used to live here with your Momo. Cathrine laughed. Here? This is the last home a Snow Queen would choose. It's far too boring. A bright light flashed through the window. The floorboards shifted as thunder rattled the earth. Rain, like drops of silver, banged hard against the rooftop. Tina and Cathrine turned to the window that was framed in a layer of silver ice that was slowly breaking apart under the rain. Out on the horizon, they could see the strange gray clouds reaching toward their humble town, as well as the bouncing stripes of yellow. "Where's Aksel?" she could hear her fa ask in the distance. "That boy always running off. Today we should be together as a family." "He's probably just in the nearby woodland," Momo Bente responded. "Calm down. He'll make it before the storm gets too bad." Sharp wind sent a piercing whistle into the air. Cathrine squinted past their fence and watched the stretch of trees behind it, waiting for her brother and his friend to appear, hoods wrapped around their faces to block out the needles of rain. "Where are you, Aksel?" she whispered. The fort wasn't that far away, and he always caught the coming storms well before they hit. The darkening sky lit up, then dimmed. Rain fell in heavy torrents. Miguel stumbled after his friend, clutching his coat with chattering teeth. He was so cold. Too cold. He felt like his knees couldn't even bend. "Come on," Aksel called. "We're almost there." In between the naked branches, he could see the town's lampposts lighting their way. Aksel pointed at them. "I told you we are going the right way." "I can't see a thing," Miguel groaned. "There's too much rain." Aksel took Miguel's arm and slid it over his shoulder. "This way," he said, hot breath on his ear. "And here." He slipped his coat off and slung it around Miguel's drooping shoulders. "You need it more than I do." Miguel couldn't ignore how warm Aksel felt as he leaned against him. What was his secret? A bolt of lightning shot through the strange clouds, straight for a tree just a few feet from them. The bark, once brown and full of life, instantly went black as the yellow hand struck through it. Flames seemed to jump out from inside, reaching for parts of the forest that had yet to die. A now-dead limb broke off and landed right in their path, casting smoke and soot into the air around them. They both cowered backwards, coughing into their elbows. With eyes stinging from the smoke, Aksel raised his hand toward the scene of fiery chaos. A chill, something he had never felt before, crawled up through his skin. And then, poof. He opened his bleary eyes to see the flames quenched, a layer of ice wrapped around the skin of the tree. "What just happened?" Miguel asked. Aksel rubbed his thumb against the tips of his fingers, which still felt numbingly cold. "I'm not sure," he whispered. "But it doesn't matter. Let's get home before this storm gets any worse." He pulled his friend through where the fire had been. Miguel smacked his eye. "Ow!" Aksel didn't bother to ask what it was. He could see, just a few feet away, the small picket fence. They were so close. Aksel and Miguel mounted the wood logs, Miguel's knees cracking as they bent as if they too had been encased in ice, just like the burnt tree limbs. Conrad stood in the yard, arms crossed over his coat. "I was just about to go looking for you," he said gruffly. "You shouldn't have wandered so far. It was irresponsible." He motioned the two boys inside, banging his boots on the steps before entering the warm kitchen. "You act like we knew there was a storm coming," Aksel complained. "Believe me, I checked before leaving like you taught me. The sky was crystal clear. You can't be mad at me as if I planned this." Conrad sighed and rested his hand on his son's shoulder. "I apologize. I only worry." His eyes softened, looking into Aksel's that were the color of the sea during a storm, and Conrad wondered how much longer he could protect him.